the MCAT CARS podcast, session number 54. The CARS section of the MCAT gives thousands of pre-meds nightmares every night. Whether you're an ESL student, lack confidence while reading, or a slow reader like me, Jack Westin and the medical school headquarters are here to help you score higher in every section so you can be confident you're ready to get the MCAT score of your dreams. Welcome to the MCAT CARS podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, and as always, I'm joined by Jack Westin from jackwestin.com. If you have not been to jackwestin.com yet, if you have not signed up for his free daily CARS passages, I recommend you do so. Go to jackwestin.com, click on practice, and then CARS daily passages right to your email inbox. This week, we have a great episode, a great passage, all about empathy. Jack Westin, back for another amazing episode of the MCAT CARS podcast. I want to know, in your mind, when students are struggling with MCAT CARS, what do you think is the easiest mindset switch that you can give a student that they can practice every day right now?
I say just don't give a bleep, just don't care. Just don't give a damn about this. Just try your best. You know, that's all you can do. Don't stress out. It's okay. Your life will go on. You're fine. It's just a test.
It's just a test.
I really think if you have that mentality, you're going to be successful in anything you do. Right. Just try your best, but don't think that your worth is resting upon your score. It's not true. Your worth depends on who you are as an individual. Are you a nice person? Or like it's the it's the qualitative things that matter, not the numbers. The numbers aren't that important. The higher your score, probably your chances of getting into a medical school are better. Yeah, probably get into a better medical school, but you can get in even with bad scores. You can become a physician even with bad scores. And look, at the end of the day, like 10 years from now, 15 years from now, do you think anyone's going to care what school you went to?
Nope.
Like really? If you want to help students or help patients, all you got to do is just love what you're doing and you're going to be great at it. And don't worry about the scores. Don't worry about the exact school you go to. Try your best, but it's not worth killing yourself over. It's just not worth it. Just try your best and take a break if you need to. And at the end of the day, just don't give a damn. Just try your best.
So it's funny. I saw a doctor yesterday and we were talking about the MCAT and because I was talking about all of the podcasts and stuff that I do. Every physician I talk to is super interested with everything that I do because I'm not practicing medicine anymore. But we were talking about the MCAT and he didn't even study for it. He's like, this was probably 93, 94, like pre-internet as we have it today. He's like, I had one of those really big MCAT books and I went to the library the day before and I started looking through it and I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to go I'm going to go get a good night's sleep. That's the one thing I can control. And funny. He did really, really well. So, but it's funny. No patient is gonna be like, hey doc, before you operate on me, what'd you get on the CARS section? Just so I know I'm in good hands.
Yeah, they're not even gonna know the difference between a DO and an MD.
Yep.
They're just gonna know, oh, you're a doctor. Awesome.
Yep.
Help me.
You care. Help me.
Yeah. Help me. That's all they care about, right? Just remember what you're in it for. That's what I say.
In it to win it. No, right. Not that one. All right. What do we have in store today?
The theme of this podcast is gray exists. So you can think of your last name, right? Yeah. Gray exists. So what do I mean by that? There's going to be a middle, right? Yeah. There's going to be a middle. It's not necessarily always on one side. The author may agree with both sides of whatever they talk about. So, I think your name is a great way to remember what CARS is all about.
All right. So just think of me. Your whole MCAT day, just think of me. You'll be good. All right. Follow along in the show notes or in your podcast app. There's a link to this article. Paragraph 1. The world seems to be getting more empathetic. All right. Nice little straightforward sentence here. The author is saying the world seems to be getting more empathetic. Americans donate to charity at record rates. So just an example of our empathy, or at least what the author is saying is empathy. We're donating money. People feel the pain of suffering in geographically distant countries brought to our attention by advances in communications and transportation. So the author is saying, hey, we understand, or we feel what's going on, right? We feel the pain, what's going on around the world because of television, radio, etc. And we're able to fly everywhere within a day. Violence, seen on historical time scales, is decreasing. So the author here kind of painting two different pictures here. So we're getting more empathetic, and violence is decreasing, which is funny because everyone thinks violence is increasing because it's all over the news.
Right. Yeah. So I love how you said it's two separate things. I like looking at it as two separate things, right? Being more empathetic and violence is decreasing. They're not necessarily correlated, right? But the author is assuming that they're related. So we go with it. But again, you don't have to make that connection. Just understand what the author's saying. They may go against this. Who knows? We don't know. Yep. But great. So what's the big picture that you have to really understand at this point?
That we're being more empathetic.
Great. So one of the things I love about this passage, and this is something that happens all the time, is the author will present this theoretical kind of point of view, right? And it becomes a truth. It becomes the foundation for the actual points the author cares about. So if you see yourself reading something that's more general, more of a bigger perspective, picture, theoretical kind of point of view, you should probably know that they're going to use that to some extent to establish a reality that we live in, and to define that reality further and give us more specific arguments around that bigger picture. Okay. So the author's painting this theme of, oh, we're nice, we're getting nicer, we're more empathetic, right? Sympathetic, compassionate. But why? Why is the author talking about this? Hopefully we'll figure it out. Go ahead.
Yep. Paragraph 2. The great modern humanitarian project of expanding the scope of our empathy to include the entire human race seems to be working. Oh, all right. So I didn't know I was in a project. So the author here, I don't know what he means by this great modern humanitarian project, but the author says it's working.
Okay, let's go. I mean, it's just, again, very, very big, broad strokes here. I really don't know where the author is going with this. It's just that we're being nicer.
Yep.
Okay.
Our in-group, which is a good psych-soc term, those we choose to include in our inner circle and to spend our energies on, is growing, and our out-group, everybody else, shrinking. So the author here is saying that the people who we spend time with, who we spend energy on, the people around us, is growing, and those outside is shrinking.
What does that mean if your inner group is growing?
You're being exposed to more people.
You
maybe
in group. So choose those we choose to include in our inner circle and spend our energies on. So we're spending our energies on more people, right? And that's a good thing, right? That sounds like we're more empathetic. So it's going along the same lines. That's something I want you to pick up on.
Okay.
All right.
But there's a wrinkle in this perfect picture. Our instinctive tendency to categorize the world into, quote, us and, quote, them is difficult to overcome. So the author here is showing us we have this instinctive tendency, right? Well, however we want to make that mean, whether that's just part of our biology, is we categorize us and them, and it's hard to overcome. It is in our nature to favor helping in-group members like friends, family, or fellow citizens, and to neglect or even punish out-group members. Okay, so again, it's in our nature. So we have the author here, instinctive tendency and in our nature. So it's painting kind of this interesting picture.
Okay, so we're now adding a layer to our painting.
Mm-hmm.
So the first layer was, oh, we're nice. We're getting nicer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now what is the author doing?
The author is saying that we have this built-in tendency in our nature to not be nice.
Isn't that contradicting it though? Like, isn't that contradicting what the author said in the beginning?
Yeah.
The first paragraph?
Mm-hmm. A little bit, potentially.
Sort of. Yeah. So we're establishing this dichotomy, right? These two different ways of looking at things. One is that we're getting nicer. The other one is that we're naturally trying to exclude people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go ahead and see where this is going.
All right. Even as some moral circles expand, others remain stubbornly fixed or even contract. Just think of Democrats and Republicans, Sunnis and Shiites, Duke and North Carolina basketball fans. All right, so the author talks about moral circles, which he hasn't really brought up morals yet, but moral circles are apparently expanding. But then others, right? Other parts of us, and then give some examples of where we have conflict of us versus them.
Right. Okay. So going back to the fact that we might exclude people.
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead.
Next paragraph. The end point of the liberal humanitarian project, which is universal empathy, would mean no boundary between in-group and out-group. All right. So again, I don't know about this humanitarian project going on, but it's interesting. In the previous paragraph, the author talks about it as the great modern humanitarian project. And in this one, he calls it a liberal humanitarian project. So it's very interesting that he changes, or she changes, the words there.
I love that. Yeah. So liberal doesn't mean it's bad, but
Yep.
it does mean it's one-sided potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In aiming for this goal, we must fight our instincts. So the goal, again, of no boundary between in versus out. Our instincts are telling us that there is an us versus them. And so we have to fight that.
That's the gray.
Yep.
That's the gray. So we can have both. We can be towards empathy, but we're also what? We're also feeling of inherently biased exclusion, right?
Yeah.
So we can have both, but we have to fight it. We have to fight that natural kind of urge here. Okay.
Yeah. That is possible to a degree. So the author is saying that we can fight, but only to a degree. Research confirms that people can strengthen their moral muscles and blur the divide between in-group and out-group. So just giving an example here of we have research, right? Research gives us everything.
What does blur the divide mean?
So blur the divide. So we have the divide, right? Us versus them. So blur the divide means make that line less so.
Good. So it's bringing in the groups.
The gray.
Right?
That's the gray.
Okay. The gray, blur. Yeah. Okay, good.
Practicing meditation, for example, can increase empathy, improving people's ability to decide emotions from people's facial expressions, and making them more likely to offer a chair to someone with crutches. All right, so one specific example here, meditation and what that can do. Simply increasing people's beliefs in the malleability of empathy increases the empathy they express toward ideologically and racially dissimilar others. So just having people agree with or have them know that you can change empathy increases empathy, which is good.
Okay.
That's cool. Good little trick there. And when all else fails, people respond to financial gain. Of course they do. Right? I'll give you $10 to be nice to that person who's different than you. Which is very interesting. I was watching Shark Tank, the newest season of Shark Tank, and they had the founder of Kind bars, and one of the things that he did was that he got the Palestinians and Israelis together for business purposes. Again, talking about, right, the financial gain. So they responded to the financial gain saying, okay, I'll put up with you, even though you're very different than me and I'm supposed to hate you. And over time, working together, they realized, oh, we're the same.
That's a great example.
Yeah. All right. My co-authors and I have shown that introducing monetary incentives for accurate perspective taking increased Democrats and Republicans' ability to understand each other and to believe that political resolutions were possible. All right. So one specific thing about money and the example of Democrats and Republicans.
A lot of students read this example and don't really understand it. Does that matter?
Nope.
You have to know. Just as long as you know that you can incentivize people financially to be more empathetic, that's all that matters here. But if you want to understand this last sentence, it's basically saying, look, if we incentivize it monetarily for you to think of things in the right perspective or correct perspective and try to be empathetic, we'll reward you in some cases.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're actually honest about how other people feel, then we'll give you some money, which hopefully makes you more empathetic.
Okay. Next paragraph. But these exercises can take us only so far. All right. So the author then saying, okay, we can only do this to a certain extent, right? We can't turn everyone into empathetic beings. In fact, there is a terrible irony in the assumption that we can ever transcend our parochial tendencies entirely. So this is a very confusing sentence that would be one that I'd want to just skip over, taking home that basically like we can't assume that this is something that we can easily fix or do.
Yeah, so we'll break down this sentence, but I love what your attitude towards this, right? Let's just move on, right? The first sentence is enough. It says these exercises can only take us so far, only so far. So we cannot be as empathetic as we'd like to be, right? So maybe we are just going to be naturally, instinctively very, I guess, closed-minded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in this case, it says in fact. So we know off the bat it's going in the same direction. So you don't have to worry too much about it. But let's break it down. There is a terrible irony. So what is an irony? Basically, something that's happening that we don't expect, right? We say something, but the opposite basically happens. In the assumption that we can ever transcend our parochial tendencies entirely. So if we assume that we can somehow overcome these narrow-minded tendencies, we're going to be screwed. We're going to end up, being worse off, or at least it's going to lead us to this opposite direction, right? So parochial means, I know it has some like church definition, but in my mind, I think of narrow in this case. So narrow tendencies, even if you didn't know what that word means, like you said, Ryan, in the previous podcast episode, just let it go. Just blur it out. Just delete it from your mind.
Yeah.
And read without that word, right? And I think that's a great strategy here. Okay, go ahead.
Social scientists have found that in-group love and out-group hate originate from the same neurobiological basis, are mutually reinforcing, and co-evolved because loyalty to the in-group provided a survival advantage by helping our ancestors to combat a threatening out-group. Right, so just a little bit of history on why we have this in-group and out-group. That means that, in principle, if we eliminate out-group hate completely, we may also undermine in-group love. So that's interesting. If we don't hate, right? Don't hate our out-group, then it might hurt our in-group. It's very interesting. That's the irony.
Right.
I'm guessing.
Right, and understanding the ancestor stuff is really important, right? I would say understand that. So it's helping us evolutionarily speaking. Go ahead.
Empathy is a zero-sum game. All right. So the zero-sum game, I don't know if everyone really understands what that means. But my assumption is that the author is saying, right, there isn't a ton of empathy to go around, right? It's not like we can just love everyone. Unfortunately, it's a zero-sum game, meaning if we give to others, we take from some.
Exactly. No, this is basically suggesting, and you could get this from that the second to last sentence, right? That you can't have winners. Not everyone is going to be a winner. We're going to have some winners. We're going to have some losers, right? So zero sum basically suggests that if you add everything together, you're going to get zero, right? So that's why empathy is a zero sum together game. So if some people gain more empathy, we lose on some other end. So if it's a +1, there must be a -1 to account for that +1. And that leads us to zero, right? So that's what the zero sum game really means, but you don't have to understand it to that level. That's not important. The point is, if one gains, the other one loses. Okay? So if you eliminate outgroup hate completely, which is empathy, we may also undermine. We don't know exactly, but we hurt our in-group love somehow. Hopefully they'll describe that in the future.
Okay.
All
right. Last paragraph here. Absolute universalism, in which we feel compassion for every individual on earth, is psychologically impossible. I think a lot of people in our country would choose to fight that assumption. But interesting, right? So the author is saying we just can't love everybody, right? Going back to zero sum game. Ignoring this fact carries a heavy cost. We become paralyzed by the unachievable demands we place on ourselves. Right? So what happens potentially if we try to do this?
Right. If we ignore this fact. So what does that mean? That means you don't believe this idea that, compassion is impossible for everyone or for every individual, right? Or compassion for every individual is impossible. So if you ignore that and you think, okay, yeah, I can give compassion to every individual, then you're going to be paralyzed by its unachievable demands. So it's maybe overwhelming you because you have to be nice to everyone. Okay.
Yep. Okay. We can see this in our public discourse today. All right. So the author getting ready to give us some information. So public discourse. Discussions of empathy fluctuate between worrying that people don't empathize enough and fretting that they empathize too much with the wrong people. So there's the kind of the weird, am I doing it right?
Right.
Kind of discussion there. Okay. These criticisms both come from the sense that we have an infinite capacity to empathize and that this is our fault if we fail to use it. Okay. So those last two sentences are interesting. So the public discourse, the discussions fluctuate. So they change between worrying that people don't empathize enough and fretting that they empathize too much with the wrong people. So it sounds like people are worried, like, oh, you don't care enough about people, and then other people are like, wait a minute, those are our outgroup. You shouldn't be caring about them.
Right. That's the whole zero sum game.
Yeah.
Right. So we are undermining the in-group love if we give too much out-group love. Right. So that's the overwhelming nature of this. And I guess it says that, it's impossible to achieve. We get paralyzed by this. So yeah, so good. And then I think the last sentence is important. These criticisms both come from the sense that we have an infinite capacity to empathize. So we have this issue if we think we can always empathize with everyone.
Yeah.
And it is our fault. It's not saying it is our fault, but this happens, this problem of being overwhelmed, we assume it's our fault, but it's not our fault really, right? It's just how we are.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's something common that a lot of pre-meds deal with, especially those who go on trips abroad to Guatemala or other countries and do some volunteering over there. A lot of the in-group thinking is, well, there's plenty of places here in the States that need your help. Like, why do you have to go over there to those people?
Oh my God. Yeah, that's such a great example. Yeah, I love that. That's a good way of looking at it.
Okay. Awesome. So very interesting article here. What do you think is a good take home for students potentially to carry forward to the next passage they're going to read?
I would say just be aware that the author is going to present different sides and they may be in the middle, right? In this case, the author said, look, we're going towards more empathy. But wait, we can't be empathetic towards everyone, right? And so it's basically trying to establish that there's a gray. Got to do we are being more empathetic, but we can't ever reach total absolute empathy for everyone. And you have to be okay with that middle. And yeah, you should know the big point being that, you can't give empathy to everyone, but you should know that the author is trending towards empathy for most people. So if you understand, it's kind of like a line where you're not necessarily directly in the center of the line, but you have to know that you're not completely at one end either. You have to know what side of the line you're on, exactly where. And the only way you can do that is if you actually read every paragraph. So big picture, just go with what you understand. Be aware of middles and that there may be exceptions. And if you can do that, I think you're going to be okay.
All right, there you have it. Another great episode. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you have not signed up for Jack's free Cars Daily Passages, I highly recommend you do that. You can only improve your car section by practicing. Practice reading every day. Practice going through a passage like these free Cars Daily Passages from Jack Westin, trying to understand what the author is trying to tell you, or the test writer in these situations. That is how you improve. While you're listening to these episodes, I highly encourage you to read the passage first, or go paragraph by paragraph and then play and pause this podcast to hear the breakdowns as you go. That's how you are going to improve. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the MCAT Cars podcast.
This is MedEd Media.